chased by the deep state, fighting for independence, thinking about revolution, looking for alternative solutions. The enemies of the deep state will tell you what others even don't dare to think. Manuel Ochsenreiter and Mateusz Piskorski.
Hello. Welcome to our next podcast, after maybe the worst podcast we ever made. My name is Manuel Ochsenreiter. I'm editor-in-chief of German news magazine Zuerst. And on the other side is Mateusz Piskorski. Hello, Mateusz.
Yes, hello. One of the editors of weekly journal Polish Thought.
And I think we have to make a lot of things good after our last 1 hour Battleship podcast. I think it was a historical podcast, since at the end there might have been more hosts than listeners.
Yes, but I guess that the feedback was quite good, so we haven't annoyed our listeners, and we still have some listeners, I guess, yes?
You know, I would never lie, and I can tell you millions of emails, millions of positive emails reached me, and I'm sure also you, who told us, do it again, but I say this is a thing we can only do once in a while. We cannot do every day.
Yes, I guess that in some time we'll come back to this magnificent formula of an avant-garde podcast, but let's make it today more traditional.
Yes, absolutely, yes. And I think we have today a very important topic, since everyone is talking about this since, well, now already since weeks. Everyone speaks about the political and also the geopolitical impact of coronavirus, and we were also speaking about this some days ago in our Battleship podcast, that the world will be not the same after the corona crisis. And I think for a lot of people in the audience, or a lot of people are not aware that these are waves in human history, which this is not the first wave like this. So these were things which happened frequently. And we are today a little bit going to talk about these things, right?
Yes, we can make comparisons with past plagues and pandemics, which already happened in the history of the world. Although, of course, every one of them was a little bit different than the others. So do not make too far-going comparisons with the one we have now. Nevertheless, there are some similar points and some similar consequences which might occur.
I mean, if we look back in history, and I don't want to say now this was the first plague with a very, very strong geopolitical impact, which might have changed the history afterwards, because if I say this, there will be for sure one of our listeners who says, oh, I know a plague which was 2 years before or so. But at least what we can say, one of the first, well, let us say the old world changing plagues or pandemics was the so-called plague of Athens, which took place during the Second Peloponnesian War, which was around 430 before Christ. And what is interesting, we have their geopolitical content on many different levels. It was a war between the two states, or the two city-states of Athens on the one side and Sparta on the other side. And we have, well, we could say with both states on the one side, with Athens, maybe the mother of the Seapower, or of the concept of Seapower, at least in Europe. Athens had a very, very strong fleet and was relying on its fleet, while Sparta we could call the mother of the Landpower, which relied very much on its land army, on its infantry, on the training of the infantry. So we have there both totally contradicting concepts of war clashing at each other. And what is interesting is that in the beginning or during the war, Athens was not acting so bad. So Athens had a quite very good strategical position, and it even looked for a certain time that Athens general Pericles, who was leading the Athens forces, could be victorious if, and that is now the interesting point, if there wouldn't have broken out a plague, and I think historians until today, they are not really sure what kind of plague it was. So they know from, of course, historical reports, and that is also now quite interesting if we read this and compare a little bit with corona. So the symptoms were fever, redness, inflammation in the eyes, sore throats leading to bleeding, and now attention, bad breath, sneezing,
Yes.
loss of voice, coughing, vomiting, extreme thirst, insomnia, diarrhea. So this is
but it was not a biological weapon, I guess.
How can we be sure of that? No, but it sounds of course like a very, very bad hangover. But at the end, it's estimated that around 30,000 of Athens army was deceased, was dying of this disease, that maybe 1/3 of the population of Athens, so there are numbers, they are going up to 100,000, and for these times this was really, really quite a lot, where death due to the plague. And what is also interesting, Athens was trying under Pericles then to reinforce the Athens forces by mercenaries, but even the mercenaries, when they heard about the plague, they refused to go to Athens. It is expected, or the theory is, that the plague came, and this is maybe also a little parallel, the plague came to Athens via the harbor of Piraeus, so by seamen, by whoever, maybe by rats. So this is also not very well known, but also
which yes, which again make me thinking about the consequences of sea power, which is equal to the modern day liberalism, for all the pandemics. Yes, so
absolutely.
The world based on sea powers, the world based on trade, the world based on liberalism today is definitely more vulnerable for any kind of plagues, any kind of pandemics than the world represented by Sparta at that time, the world of Landpower, the world of a closed, let's say, autarky, an autarkic state. So this is quite important moment again to make some parallels. I guess it's possible
absolutely.
Even with that time. Yes?
Absolutely, and we can really compare the harbors and the harbor business of sea powers of these times, but really until far into today's time, if we compare this also then with harbors and with airports, the concept of globalism is of course also part of this, well, tradesman concept of the sea power. The sea power lives by the tradesman. The hero of the sea power is the tradesman, and not the farmer, not the soldier, not the guy who stands on his soil, but the one who travels to sell and to buy and to trade. And that makes it quite interesting, and that allows us really to draw a parallel. But there are also other parallels. Maybe you heard there are really crazy things right now happening in Europe. For example, there was some news in Germany that young crazy people, they are celebrating so-called corona parties. So they break the law of social distancing and celebrate together. Or there were other reports of young people coughing and spitting on old people to scare them. So what took place in Athens back then? It was the fear of law. It is more or less called the fear of law disappeared. It means that people who expect their certain death because all the neighbors got sick and all the relatives got sick, that they didn't understand anymore why they should respect the laws. So we had within this pandemic times in Athens, we had a total orgy taking place, an orgy of violence, of crime, and of all kinds of inappropriate behavior. We had times of people spending money in a total crazy way, since they thought, well, if I cannot spend it anymore when I'm alive, I should do it now. While on the other side, there were some poor people who were very wise, and they were practicing social distancing. So the Athens society turned. So first of all, they lost the war. The land power Sparta won against the sea power Athens. And second, the society within Athens, after the plague changed in a way that daily life in Athens was not anymore like before the plague. And I think that is a parallel we can draw. And we don't know how, for example, classical Greek or ancient Greece would have developed if the plague of Athens wouldn't have appeared not on the battleground, but in Athens.
But there's one important difference, I guess you'll agree with me, and the difference that now the whole world, maybe with exceptions of, I don't know, North Korea and some other very distant places, reminds me Athens, and there's no Sparta anymore. This is the main difference, and that's why the so-called coronavirus pandemics is a plague of a global Athens, let's say, yes. I guess that all this liberal way of life and the liberal economic systems remind Athens and not Sparta, yes?
Absolutely, yes. And I think what we can say already today is the party is over. The Liberal Party might be, or hopefully is definitely over after coronavirus. Or don't you agree?
Well, everything depends. We have to stress and to our listeners that we are not medical experts, yes? Which means that it will be hard for us to predict the, let's say, biological, medical, and as well as demographical aspects of the whole crisis. But yes, presumably, yes, we'll have a, let's say, backlash to autarkic systems, to the notion of a closed market economy, which was elaborated by Johann Gottlieb Fichte, for instance. So I guess that, yes, of course, there will be at least another mood when it comes to liberalism comes, yes. Nevertheless, you have also touched very important question, the question about the failure of the state in times of plague. You are talking about people feasting there, people, let's say, behaving as it were the last days of their life and not observing any kinds of rules and regulations of the times of plague. And we'll have the same now. So those see, for instance, in Ukraine, in Somalia, in other parts of the world, in Afghanistan, will probably fall victim to a complete failure of still existing theoretical state structures, yes, and they'll become territories of total chaos. This is also the new thing. So a little bit later in the medieval times, we had also several plagues, as you know, starting with plagues like leprosy, like scrofula, and other infectious diseases, and ending with the so-called Black Death, which is, of course, the most well known here in Europe. Nevertheless, there was also a very interesting point at that time. Of course, the plagues were perceived as maybe not a kind of biological or natural disaster, but of course they were explained metaphysically from the point of view of religious societies and from the point of view of, let's say, God's wrath on the people. The difference between them was that when it comes to leprosy and scrofula, which appeared in Europe in 10th, 11th, and 12th century, they were more treated as a kind of individual God's punishment against individual people, sinful people, and so on. Yes, because let's say that the number of the victims was not so big as in the case of the Black Death. Yes, which is worthy to discuss. But anyway, we all know about leprosy because it was so popular and still existing, for instance, in Scandinavia, even in 19th century, yes. But in most other European countries, there were first measures created then for not a quarantine, but a total isolation, yes, the so-called leprosariums. You have heard about them.
Yes.
So this was the first means to isolate the people, the affected people, the lepers that time from the rest of the society. Of course, we use the same methods, although they are perhaps more humanitarian now. Yes,
they didn't have Facebook and Skype.
Yes,
then.
yes, that's the difference. And then came a disease which was quite similar, also a bacterial disease, quite similar to leprosy. That was scrofula. And at that time, what is interesting now and what has also some parallels with the contemporary situation, there was the notion of the royal touch. This was the idea that the kings, the monarchs at that time, had some healing potential. As you know, there was at that time a kind of deep conflict within Western European culture between the Guelphs and the Ghibellines, and those who perceived the king or an emperor as one who has also spiritual power over the world, thought that it would be good to symbolize this spiritual power by healing the people. So the kings put their hands, that's why we are talking about the royal touch, the so-called royal touch, put their hands on the people which were sick with scrofula, which were infected, trying to heal them. In some cases, as the legends, the stories, the told stories say, there were quite good effects, quite good results of such a healing, because scrofula sometimes passes itself without any additional healing. So rationally, to explain that, it was quite possible that someone could feel that he was healed by a king. Yes,
I can hear you, and I know what in what direction that will go now. I know that.
Yes, but what I would like to say and what I would like to ask you: do you see some parallels when it comes to when it comes to the let's say contemporary political behavior of political leaders of several nation states all over the world, and the times when the royal touch was something important? And I'm not joking, I'm not kidding on it, because this had a very, very profound symbolic nature and significance. I mean, we are not talking that the king or a president of any given country now in contemporary times has some healing potential. Yes, we are talking about the symbolic dimension of the whole thing. So do you see any parallels?
Absolutely, and we shouldn't forget to empathize in this context that a liberal society per se cannot provide that what is called the royal touch, since this has no space, this metaphysical view on leadership, or on a leader, as you said, on a king, on a president, on a prime minister, cannot take place in a liberal society. We are not seeing this in Europe. We are not seeing this in Italy. We don't see this in France. We don't see it in Germany. We even don't see. We see now that in Belgium and in Sweden also is coronavirus very active. We don't see the Belgian king or the Swedish king being active. But what we see is that in China and in Russia, both of the leaders are taking the lead. And they manage, of course, by the system, but also by a type of metaphysical power, which is connected to them personally and to their position, is giving hope to the people. And I think that is very important, that people don't become negative even in the worst situation of a plague, of a pandemics. And I think that is the parallel you were speaking about, right?
Yes, definitely. I mean, In times of war, the president in contemporary countries is not only a constitutional head of the state, but also a leader, yes?
Yes.
A leader and a commander in force of all the army and so on, yes? So in this particular case, symbolically, we have a kind of war waged in defense of the whole society against the virus, against the epidemics, and they, as the real leaders, as the true leaders, are in the front of the battle. Yes, so they are showing symbolically their presence there. They are not afraid of going to any kinds of hospitals and so on. They are present at the place of the crisis. Xi Jinping, the chairman of Chinese People's Republic, was seen several times in Wuhan during the pandemics. Yes, Vladimir Putin has been lately seen in Moscow Kommunarka Hospital visiting the people with coronavirus. That is the contemporary royal touch, I guess, and its symbolic significance is very important. There's no royal touch in liberal societies, as you noticed.
Even not in the monarchies of the liberal societies. Or did you see Queen Elizabeth or Prince Charles in UK being now very active in this? Or I mean even Boris Johnson cannot. Of course he is he's maybe more the authoritarian like leader, but even he cannot. I think it is in the nature of the liberal system that the leader cannot be a leader, because the liberal system doesn't have the capacity for a function such as a leader. Maybe in total exceptions like in World War II, where Churchill became a leader in UK. But I think that this is absolutely impossible. We have Angela Merkel in Germany who could become now a leader by ordering the right stuff. If Angela Merkel would order today a total lockdown of whole Germany, and she would order the Germans to stay in their houses just to overcome the crisis, they would follow.
But she had by the way, she had a photo session I have seen in Bild, I guess, in a supermarket there in Germany. So,
yes, the history has to be rewritten, I know.
Yes, so not in a hospital, but in a supermarket. Yes. That is the difference.
Yes. And thanks to Bild, we know that she bought 2 rolls of toilet paper and cherries.
Yes, we know all the details about her everyday needs. Yes.
And did you see on the pictures that in a very decent way, but always visible, her bodyguards? So she was pushing this wagon through the supermarket, and I think they were throwing out all the other customers for 2 hours to make these pictures of Angela Merkel, how she's putting toilet paper in her wagon. So I mean, of course,
that's true. But Manuel, not to talk too much offensive things, or not to make too many jokes on Germany, which is your beloved country, and I like it very much too. I can already tell that I will propose to discuss during our next podcast very soon the issue of elections, because in my country, in Poland, we are going to have elections, presidential elections on the 10th of May, and we are the most brave and courageous country of the world because the elections haven't been postponed.
Everyone knows that Poland is the most courageous and bravest country in the world. You don't have to empathize this, but when you said these nice words about Germany, I had a little tear. Thank you.
No problem. You're welcome.
You touched. Yes, because our program is not just our podcast is not just the podcast of social distancing. It is also the podcast of true feelings and emotions.
Yes, and emotions. That's right.
I think we get slowly to the end, and because
but we promise that we'll be here again very soon, and we hope that then we could continue our discussion about different pandemias in the history of the world.
Absolutely. I mean, we stopped in the medieval times, so there are many more very interesting and enthusiastic pandemics after after medieval times. I just say World War I, and we shouldn't forget that in many, many wars, in almost all the wars before the modern wars, more people were dying because of diseases than by the direct consequences and effects of the war, what is very interesting. Even soldiers, even seamen were suffering more, very often more, under pandemics and sickness than by the sword or by the bullet of the enemy.
Yes, and we'll also talk about the impact of the coronavirus on political systems, including the elections. I have just mentioned it very shortly, but it's quite interesting. I mean, to analyze which countries postpone the elections, which countries are still going to organize the elections in the coming weeks and months, and what is the impact on the internal policy and political systems of several European and also non-European countries of the coronavirus.
I'm convinced that this situation right now is a game changer in many European countries, and a game changer in a way it is very hard to predict in which direction. I'm totally convinced by that, because I think now I'm not so firm with the inner political situation in Poland, since it is a country which not so intensively interested me in the past. But I think with this coronavirus, anything is again possible in both directions, and I think it will be very, very interesting how the people. I think the people will also decide for leadership, and I mean, I think the people have the desire for leadership and for getting the lead and for getting a clear message in what direction we go now to protect ourselves, rather than leaderships which say, well, do whatever you want, you are free, we are liberal, you can go out, you can stay inside, we don't care. I think we are now at a point where the liberal laissez-faire is understood by the majority of the population as a type of a careless sentiment towards the own population, and that is precisely liberalism as well.
Yes, that's true, but anyway, let's discuss these internal changes and revolutionary potential in different countries after the coronavirus, or in times of coronavirus in our next podcasts.
Absolutely, yes. So we are very thankful for listening until the end of our recent podcast.
And we still promise to get back to our warships game sometime.
Let's
perhaps not in the next chapter, Manuel, but I hope that very soon, as many of the listeners still would like us to do that, to repeat that again, we'll get back to it.
We could try a party of Star Trek 3D chess. I think it could take 7 hours or so, but we have time. The audience has time. So what should stop us? What should stop us?
Everyone has time, as we are speaking from our deep hidden anti-corona bunkers.
And there we have chessboards, ball pens, and paper, and we don't need more.
That's right.
Okay, thank you so much to the audience for your time, for your attention.
You.
And we will be soon back. Okay, from my side, goodbye. I give the word to Mateusz.
Thank you, and hear you soon. Keep and stay in good health there in the bunkers.
Because if you are sick, it's not so much fun to listen to us. Okay.
That's true. Okay, thank you.
Thank you,
and
bye-bye.
Hear you soon. Bye.
This program was presented to you by Manuel Ochsenreiter and Mateusz Piskorski, the hottest dissident who won't violate any time the global rules against racism, extremism, or any other bad isms.